You want to play games with me? Go ahead, press play. Let's see which secret you think you're holding. Her voice cracked with warning, hands white-knuckled around the tiny recorder. Put that thing down, the older woman hissed, standing rigid at the edge of the gilded rug. The air shimmered between them, heavy with the smell of old perfume and dust. You always did like to talk first, didn't you? A dozen eyes shifted from one woman to the other as silence fell through the room. Go on, the younger said, jaw set. Tell them how you made her change the will, or maybe we can all listen together. She thumbed the button, the low crackle filling every corner. The woman's ruby nails trembled against her clutch. You wouldn't dare. A pause, brittle and electric. Try me. Before this showdown, before the eyes and the shattering silence, she had just $34.36 in her account and the world at her back. Here's how it began. The rain streaked against the windshield in Silver Creek, Johnson County, Wyoming, making every street lamp dissolve into thin ribbons. Julia kept both hands tight on the steering wheel, her last $34.36 gleaming on her cracked phone screen, mocking her. To her left, the two suitcases and her daughter's purple backpack pressed against the console, half the zippers gaping open, a stuffed arm poking out. Mama, Chloe whispered, her voice small, is Grandma's house far? Julia shook her head, though she had never been there. Not too far, baby, just out past the river. We'll be warm soon. Chloe, age 7, stared at the fog-blurred glass, brow knitted. Will there be pancakes like Grandpa made? If there's a pan, we can flip a miracle, Julia managed, blinking away the stinging in her eyes. It was better to joke than to admit they had nowhere else to go. A burst of memory flared as she turned off the main road. 5 months ago, she'd been a wife with a mortgage, her husband chasing someone else's promises all the way to Houston. No child support, no forwarding address. 2 weeks ago, her job at the diner dried up. Last Friday, her only stability left. A funeral notice from her stepmother, Diane Hollister, addressed not with love, not even with civility, but, Julia, you should at least pay your respects. Now headlights shuddering across muddy Wyoming gravel, she rolled into the battered driveway of the farmhouse. Dilapidated didn't cover it, the place looked as if a hard wind might cart it away. The little shed off to the left sagged, its tape peeling, half the turquoise paint scraped by storms. This, apparently, was what her father had left her. A dump. Explicitly, according to Diane, the tool shed and 2 acres of goat pasture. The rest goes, as it always should, to blood proper and to those who show respect. Inside, Diane was wearing a black designer dress, her lipstick a slash of berry against pale skin, and was surrounded by Julia's half-brother Garrett and Aunt Jean, who flashed Julia a brittle smile. Diane's words coiled. I hope you're not here looking for a handout, Julia. We all know what you're after. Julia's face burned, her arms folded across her chest. Chloe shrank back, one hand gripping her fingers. Garrett barked a laugh. You gonna make a home in Dad's old shed? There's a raccoon in there with better prospects. At least raccoons fight for their space, Chloe muttered, and for that, Julia had to fight a smile. Her daughter's grit was the only glue she had left. Diane's eyes were cold. You have 2 weeks until the estate sale clears everything out. Whatever junk you want from the shed, fetch it before the bank lock changes. As Julia squeezed Chloe's shoulder, her gaze fell on a weathered upright piano in the corner. She remembered, or maybe dreamed, her father playing old cowboy ballads late at night, keys sticking, damp Wyoming air thick with melody and loss. That was when she noticed a long, hair-thin groove across the back panel, as if someone had once forced a screwdriver where it didn't belong. If you've ever stared at the wreckage of what should have been yours and wondered how deep the rot goes, you'll understand why Julia couldn't walk away that night. The battered shed welcomed them with the sigh of old wood, the wind howling around every seam. Julia set Chloe up on a cot with a flashlight and a pile of mystery books, promising warmth would come if she layered enough quilts. In between unpacking their world into the empty corners, she could see the farmhouse across the yard, its windows winking yellow against the coming night. Diane's shadow moved behind a blind, perfumed, powerful. As the wind whipped outside, Julia took a kitchen knife and a flashlight and crept back into the farmhouse's living room. Every board groaned with memory. She approached the old upright piano. Her father had taught her the cheap notes first, wildwood flower just before dinner, and he would smile, say, "Someday, kiddo, you'll play something real." One stubborn screw yielded, then another. The back panel eased loose, and behind the tangled harp there was a flat, velvet-lined box. Inside, the shimmer of bundled cash, and beneath it, a velvet pouch. When she peeled it open, necklaces tumbled onto her palm, emeralds, rubies, pearls. The weight was beautiful and terrible. But there was something more, a cassette tape, the label ragged, "For Julia, if you need the truth." Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped it. That was when Chloe, suddenly behind her, whispered, "Mama, are you robbing?" Julia swallowed a laugh. "Just rescuing family secrets, honey." She pressed play. The static hush gave way to her grandmother's soft, warbling voice. "If you're hearing this, then it means there's trouble Diane can't burn away. She made me do things, Julia. She threatened me, said she'd call my debts, let my people suffer. The will, my signature, it wasn't mine alone. I tried to fix it. I hope you find what I couldn't." Julia's heart hammered. The truth wasn't just ugly, it was dangerous. The next morning, Julia wrangled Chloe into her hand-me-down coat and sloshed through ankle-deep puddles to the office of their only possible ally, Walter Carrick, an aging attorney with fingers like gnarled roots and a habit of spitting out the word damn every other sentence. "You again," he muttered as they stepped into his overheated office. "Didn't expect to see Hollister kin after the display yesterday." "I need help, Mr. Carrick," Julia said softly. She unscrewed the cash box and pressed the jewelry pouch into his hands. "And I need you to listen to something." Chloe sat down quietly in a corner chair, reading a battered Nancy Drew. Walter pressed play. The cassette tape word, Julia's grandmother's confession blooming in the stale air. He squinted, gold-framed glasses sliding down his nose. "You realize what you're holding here. This isn't just family riffraff. This is enough to make half the county sit up straight. Those gems alone will fetch 7 figures at auction. The recording, more." Julia's throat burned. "Diane said the estate sale in less than 2 weeks. If I don't move, everything gets auctioned. The evidence, the jewelry, the truth, gone." Walter tapped his wristwatch. "You've got less time than you think. Diane owes people, bad people, Julia. If she finds out you have this, you and the girl better run, not walk." He scribbled names on a legal pad, a jewelry assessor, an archivist for the bank, an audio lab in Riverton. "No more delays," he said. "Chain of custody, legal verification, and keep your head low. Let me be the one to bring this to probate. Don't let Diane get wind you've got real proof." Chloe piped up, "Does this mean we get pancakes, sir?" Walter managed a ghost of a smile. "Maybe after we fix the mess, kiddo." Julia clutched her purse to her chest, a feeling between fear and possibility sparking inside her. This was the second time in 2 days she'd felt destiny tilt. 12 hours later, Julia's world veered again. She was leaving the assessor's office, a manila folder thick with documents tucked under her arm, when Diane's custom Range Rover screeched to a stop behind her in the drizzle. Diane stormed from the car, heels stabbing deep into the churned gravel, voice already slicing. "You think you can outplay me, Julia? This is my house, my family. That jewelry is part of my marriage settlement. Don't tempt me to show you what a Hollister can do." Julia raised her chin, channeling every ounce of resolve that got her through 3 states and a divorce with nothing but her daughter's birth certificate. "We both know what Grandma said in that tape. You want to hear it with the sheriff present?" Diane's face morphed, flickering between arrogance and dread. "You'll ruin everything for both of us," she hissed. "You want Chloe dragged through all this? Stop pretending you're a hero. Walk away, or you won't even have a shed left to sleep in." Julia gripped Chloe's hand. "You abused your power. I'm through being scared." She strode away, Diane's curses echoing against tin and mud. That night, as the wind scoured the shingles, Julia played the tape again and again, listening for every breath, every tremor in her grandmother's voice. She cataloged jewelry with Chloe at her elbow, tiny hands separating pearls and gold. She logged serial numbers, photographed scars in the velvet, and wrote a letter to the estate judge, copying everything to Walter. "Mama, are you nervous?" Chloe asked, folding a strand of pearls into a shoebox. Julia brushed a strand of hair behind Chloe's ear. "I'm something, but I'm tired of being told where I belong, honey." On the morning of the estate hearing, Julia met Walter outside the courthouse doors, her backpack bulging with folders and a thumb drive holding the audio file. He adjusted his hat against the Wyoming chill. Lines of determination framed his thin lips. "If this works, Diane won't be able to show her face at the Rotary again," he grunted. Inside, the courtroom buzzed. Hollisters filled a row, Diane at the center, regally decked in a new beige sheath, icy smile resting just above the clerk's head. Garrett glowered at Julia, thumb tapping his phone, and Aunt Jean whispered something sharp. The judge called for order. Walter stood, voice crisp. "My client, Julia Hollister, contests the will on grounds of undue influence and presents direct evidence. We submit a first-generation audio recording, authenticated to the deceased. It includes an explicit confession and direct admission by a party present today." Diane's ring glittered as she pushed to her feet. "Objection, that tape is a fabrication. She'd do anything for a payday." The judge frowned. "Let's hear the recording." Julia's hands trembled as she hit play. The room stilled, her grandmother's soft voice threading through. "If you're hearing this, then I'm gone." Diane forced my hand. The signature was not given freely. Diane's face drained of color by degrees. Walter leaned in, voice low but clear. "Is that or is that not your voice, Mrs. Hollister, threatening the deceased?" Diane shot up, voice shrill. "This is a setup, a dirty, manipulated lie." The judge's gavel fell hard. "Enough, we'll get an expert. For now, the jewelry and recordings are to be held until a verdict. Any attempts to tamper will be considered obstruction." Her facade cracking, Diane glared at Julia, promising retribution without a word. In the hallway, Julia crushed back tears as Chloe slipped her small hand into hers. "Mama, did you win?" Julia knelt, voice thick. "We're not done yet, sweet pea, but I'm not running anymore." The town for once was watching from all sides. The next day, as the gray sky pressed low over the farmhouse, Diane made her move. She cornered Julia behind the barn, voice deadly quiet. "If you keep this up, I'll ruin you. Those debts, they'll find you before the law does. Your daughter's not safe around all this." Julia's resolve hardened. "If you touch Chloe, if you so much as threaten us again, I'll make sure the whole county hears that tape. Your pretty reputation won't survive one season." Diane paused, fury and desperation warring in her painted eyes. "You want a deal? You give me the jewelry and I'll find a way, any way, to fix this. Otherwise, you'll spend your life fighting ghosts." Breathless, Julia replied, "No deal. You sign this agreement, you admit what you did in full, and then you leave us alone. You'll live with the truth glued to your name, but you give up everything else. That's my only offer." For a long moment, Diane looked gutted. Then she snatched the papers and scrawled her signature, blood-red nails digging furrows across the page. Inside, surrounded by the shell-shocked silence of family and town officials, Julia called for everyone's attention. "This is who Diane really is," she announced. She let the tape play, the words echoing along paneled walls. "She's done enough damage for one lifetime, but I'm not her. She can keep her freedom, so long as her lies end tonight." Diane tried to bluster. "You want to play games with me? Go ahead, press play. Let's see which secret you think you're holding." Julia met her gaze, recorder steady in hand. "Put that thing down," Diane spat, eyes darting for support. Nobody moved. "You always did like to talk first, didn't you?" Julia's voice rang clear. Gasps rippled through the room. "Go on," Julia told her. "Tell them how you made her change the will, or maybe we can all listen together." She pressed the button. Grandmother's voice tumbled out into the room, steady, earnest, unwavering. Diane's poise melted. Her hands trembled, the ruby nails now a shoddy shield. "You wouldn't dare," Diane whispered. The hush was absolute. Julia smiled, small and dangerous. "Try me." Walter's voice broke the stillness. "We have a signed agreement in front of witnesses. Any attempt to void it, the sheriff gets a copy of everything." The family, once syrup-thick with solidarity, recoiled from Diane. Aunt Jean gathered her coat, muttering, "You finally did it, Diane. Got what you wanted and lost more than you bargained for." Outside the courthouse, the last of the autumn wind swept dry leaves along the curb. Garrett looked at Julia with something like respect, or maybe simple defeat. Over the next months, Diane's reputation crumbled. She lived in the largest house in Silver Creek, but invitations no longer came. Her old friends avoided eye contact at the market, whispers chasing her from aisle to aisle. Chloe and Julia rebuilt the shed, then the main house, pouring sweat and laughter into every cracked beam and wind-battered door. By the time spring winds crested the hills, they hosted what would become the first of many family reunions, open to anyone who'd stood by them. Chloe played the piano, now repaired and gleaming, her notes floating over the back pasture as if summoning ancestors from memory. "Does it feel like home now, Mama?" Chloe asked one evening, her eyes hopeful. Julia squeezed her, the scent of pancakes in the air and the golden gleam of sunset slicing across the kitchen table. "It's better," Julia answered, "because this time we decided who belongs." If you've ever wondered whether integrity could outlast spite, or if standing your ground could truly rebuild a life, remember Julia. Sometimes protecting what matters means refusing to deal even when you've already lost too much. And on some windswept Wyoming hillside, under the gaze of mountains and memory, she found something stronger than revenge, enough to stay, enough to grow, enough that no one could take away again. So if you find yourself at a crossroads with all the odds against you, ask, what's the one truth you'll refuse to bury? This time it was enough. But stories, even the ones that seem neatly sewn at the edges, don't end just because the courthouse doors close and the villains slink away to lick their wounds. All victories spill over into afternoons, into phone calls, slow repair, and the strange, stubborn weather of forgiveness. For Julia, the aftermath meant work. It meant she had to learn quickly about taxes on inherited land, about auction houses that wanted her grandmother's emeralds, about what it truly took to fix a century-old roof. She spent the next few days hunched at the creaky kitchen table, her phone warm against her ear as she wrangled with agents, appraisers, and the occasional delicate, apologetic relative. The old house held on to its chill, even after new glass went into the windows. But Chloe filled the place with color finger paintings tacked to the pantry door, songs from her school choir echoing up the stairwell, muddy boots lined up just so beside the back door. One evening, as Julia stapled a permit to the barn, she felt a presence behind her. She turned to find Garrett, hands shoved deep in the pockets of a faded jacket, his hair ruffled by the high country wind. He kicked at a stone, voice subdued. "Came to see if you need help. I figured with all the repairs, maybe." She arched an eyebrow, volunteering that's new. He looked sheepish. "Yeah, well, turns out when the money's gone and folks finally see through all the games, you figure out what's real left." Julia paused, feeling the old ache, that longing for a brother, not just a rival. "You ever swing a hammer before?" Garrett grinned crookedly. "Only at a county fair, but I can learn." They set to work, Chloe pulling stray nails from an old fence post while Garrett pounded boards back into place alongside Julia. The three of them laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years. It was awkward sometimes, but something in the rhythm of repair cracked open a space for apologies. Over stew that night, Garrett cleared his throat. "I was jealous, you know," he said. "Dad always kept your drawings tacked up in the garage, even after you left. Diane made it seem like you were the enemy, but I guess it was just easier to believe than to wonder why he kept talking about you." Julia laid down her spoon, the old hurt flaring, then fading, replaced by empathy. "He always said you'd come into your own if they let you. Maybe we can try again." Garrett nodded. "No more ghosts, I promise." From then on, he drove up every other weekend. They replaced the rotten porch steps, fixed the water heater, and planted marigolds along the front walk. When Chloe lost her first tooth, Garrett whooped almost louder than she did, clutching an ice pack to his jaw after a flying elbow from the overexcited 7-year-old. Word got out in Silver Creek. The lawyer, Walter Carrick, suddenly possessed of a gleam in his eye and a noticeable spring in his step, made a habit of stopping by with bags of groceries and legal forms in need of signatures. "You ruined my semi-retirement," he grumbled one Saturday morning, reviewing paperwork at Julia's table. "But by God, if I haven't seen this town come alive since." She poured him coffee, smiling. "You planning to retire again, Mr. Carrick?" He eyed her over the rim of his mug. "Maybe, but not until I see you run this place right. That means you'll need a proper will, miss, one that doesn't require a cassette tape and divine intervention to enforce." Julia laughed. "Fine, just as long as it doesn't involve goats in the living room. Chloe's already adopted half the strays this side of the creek." The old man gave a bark of laughter. "You know, I never much cared for the Hollisters, but damned if you haven't changed the tune around here. Makes me almost proud to be from Johnson County." Julia's heart warmed at that. The estate wasn't grand, but it was legal, and for the first time hers. Sometimes the phone rang off the hook, creditors hoping for a piece of Diane's vanished fortune, tabloids sniffing after the Wyoming war for their next headline, or out-of-town cousins offering apologies and goodwill for years of ignoring her calls. Julia learned the daily grace of saying no, thank you, and meaning it. But not every wound closed so easy. A month after the courthouse scene, Julia spotted a familiar car at the end of the driveway. The Range Rover, dusty now, tires splattered with spring mud. Chloe lingered at the window. "Is it her, Mama?" Julia smoothed a palm over her daughter's hair, voice steady. "Stay inside, love." She stepped outside, arms folded as Diane emerged, jacket cinched tight, chin high. Yet Julia saw how her stepmother hesitated on the gravel, unsure for once. Diane didn't approach the porch. She stood, clutch slipping from her wrist, and stared at the horizon, gathering her words. "I heard the stones are blooming in your garden." Julia remained silent. It was a strange thing to say, and she wasn't about to make it easier. Finally, Diane blinked. "I lost everything," she said flatly. "I suppose you already know." Julia regarded her, felt the hurt and awe that such a woman could be reduced to this shadow. She answered quietly, "It wasn't revenge, Diane, it was the truth. I never wanted your tragedy, just an end to living in someone else's lie." Diane exhaled, slow and ragged. "You ever regret it, destroying what you did so nothing but dust is left?" "No," Julia said, voice certain now. "Because I have Chloe and I have peace. I have a home that's mine. Money's not a promise, Diane, but honesty might be." The older woman took a trembling step closer, pausing beside a tumble of daffodils. "I thought if I held on hard enough to the house, to the story, to the name, eventually it would change who I was. But it never did it?" Julia shook her head gently. Diane glanced back at the house, then at Julia. "Take care of the girl, the world's meaner than it looks." With that she left, a slow, shuffling silhouette swallowed by wind and distance. Julia watched until the car slid from sight. She felt more sorrow than satisfaction. But in Diane's absence, the world seemed lighter, the colors sharper. That night, she tucked Chloe into bed beneath a faded quilt her father had pieced together, promising stories of days when even fierce women could choose new beginnings. Spring at the Hollister place was all bustle. The town, sheepish at first, began sending help, pies and paint cans, a borrowed tractor, even hands to mend the barn roof. Chloe brought home best friends with grass-stained knees and wild, shaggy puppies from the edge of the property. One Sunday, while the sun draped every field in gold, Julia called everyone in for supper. The table sagged with bounty, fried chicken, biscuits, honey from a neighbor's hive. Garrett showed up with a 3-layer chocolate cake that declined to stand, collapsing into delicious chaos after the first cut. No one minded. When the laughter died down, Aunt Jean, once brittle and wary, raised her glass. "To the people who finally said the unsayable," she declared. "To Julia for turning stones into flowers, for making this house a home again." There were tears, real ones, and hugs from people who never used to hug. As dusk fell, Julia carried her coffee onto the porch and breathed in the mingled scents of honeysuckle and pine. The pond shimmered out back, fireflies just beginning to pulse in the thickets. Chloe followed, perched on the swing beside her. "Mama, do you think Grandpa would have liked all this?" she asked quietly, tracing a pattern on Julia's palm. Julia brushed her lips over Chloe's forehead. "I think he'd be proud, honey, proud that we stayed, that we didn't let old lies win." Chloe yawned, nestling closer. "Maybe someday you could tell me everything, every secret, even the bad ones. I could be strong too." Julia smiled, voice thick. "I promise, love, I won't keep anything hidden, not from you." A beat of comfortable silence passed. Then tentatively Chloe asked, "Will we always stay here?" A swallow of emotion caught Julia. She considered the peeling clapboards, the piano's old music, the inherited garden where the stones really did bloom between weeds, all the memories and hopes bound inside those fragile walls. "We'll stay as long as it feels right," Julia said truthfully, "as long as we keep choosing it together." Chloe nodded decisively. "Good, I want to plant sunflowers by the creek and maybe get a pony someday." Julia laughed, the release of it washing away months, years of trepidation. "One step at a time, kiddo, but yes, sunflowers, ponies, whatever our home can hold." They sat in the deepening twilight, the porch swing creaking along with the wind, sharing dreams as old as family. Summer arrived slow and lush, with thunderstorms rolling off the bighorns and wild strawberries brightening the backyard. Julia found herself busy in ways that mattered, fixing a fence, writing checks that wouldn't bounce, learning Chloe's favorite lullabies on the newly tuned piano. One evening, Walter Carrick set down a thick folder on her kitchen table. "Final paperwork," he announced. "Probate's closed, county's signed off, and the estate's truly, legally yours. You did it, Julia, all of it." She stared at the thick sheaf, barely able to believe it. "Does this mean we're safe?" He nodded, eyes unexpectedly shiny. "Safe as anyone ever gets in this world." They drank to that, sipped apple cider, not whiskey, because Chloe was watching, and called it a proper closing of accounts. Time, as it does, began to soften the contours of tragedy. Diane was no longer the villain in every whispered story. She became instead a lesson, spoken of with caution and sometimes regret. People in Silver Creek changed, too. The sourness in their greetings faded, new respect grew in its place. Garrett came by with a toolbox and soon, a girlfriend he sheepishly introduced one Sunday after church. Aunt Jean invited Julia and Chloe for a holiday picnic. Even the stray goats multiplied, inexplicably, and Julia, at last, began to understand there was such a thing as laughter after hardship without price. Sometimes Julia thought of leaving, starting clean somewhere new, but always there was the long view across the pasture, the certainty that the fight for this ground had carved her and Chloe into something braver. On the first anniversary of her father's death, she let Chloe skip school. They made pancakes by the dozen, scattering berries and chocolate chips through the batter. After breakfast, Julia led Chloe outside, the sun crisp on their faces. "This is for Grandpa," she said, and together they scattered the wildflower seeds she'd saved, turning the meadow into a riot of hope. "Mama," Chloe said suddenly, shy and bright, "can we invite people to a party here, like everyone in town?" Julia squeezed her hand. "That's the best idea I've heard all year." They planned for weeks, stringing lights from the eaves, Chloe painting signs over scraps of barn wood, neighbors bringing pies and ribs and mason jars of lemonade. Music drifted from the piano and fiddles on the porch as June dusk turned everything copper. Julia watched the crowd, familiar faces. Children darting between sunflowers, Walter toasting with homemade wine, Garrett laughing in the shadow of the hayloft. This, she thought, is what my grandmother meant, not riches, not revenge or even redemption, just room enough for honest joy. Near midnight, when most had gone, Julia carried a sleepy Chloe out into the pasture. Fireflies danced, pines black and tall against the prick-blue sky. "Thank you, Mama," Chloe murmured. Julia kissed her crown, voice a whisper of promise. "We made it, kid, you and me, we made it home." And in the hush that follows every hard-won ending, the wind bent the wildflowers in gentle arcs, carrying music and memory into the night. Later, as Julia tucked Chloe into bed and listened to her soft breaths, she realized something both small and magnificent. The story wasn't about the house or money or even justice. It was about a kind of belonging that couldn't be written into any will, a sense, finally, that she was enough. Looking out at her patch of land, stars winking between the spruce, Julia smiled. No one could take this from her, not ever again. She would remember, she would keep it safe. And tomorrow, as always, would be new.